Hello and welcome to Lyda Dogma Shades of Murder, a podcast where I will share and discuss tales of true crime, mysteries, and all things dark and macabre. If you eat, play, and dream in shades of murder like me, then welcome, my kindred spirits, to your new podcast home. If you enjoy this show, please remember to follow, subscribe, share, and rate so I can present more stories to you, and we can all embrace the love, the darkness together. All of my social media and contact information you can find in the episode description below. Please be forewarned that each episode contains specific and at times very graphic and disturbing details of the case and may not be intended for all audiences. The terms female and serial killer are usually synonymous with the victim and the offender in most people's minds. Many societies strain to accept or understand the legitimacy and rampant presence of the female serial killer. Many believe them to be extremely rare, but it is estimated that 1 in 6, or about 17% of all known serial killers, are women. The history of serial killers, male or female, began with a woman named Locusta of Gaul, an assassin and an expert poison maker during the 1st century AD of the Roman Empire. Her penchant for poison as a method to kill would resurface time and time again for women to employ as a means of murder across the continents. This is the story of Lyda Flypaper, Trueblood. The Truebloods were a well-respected and all-around liked family who initially lived in Charlton County, Missouri for many years before they relocated to Twin Falls, Idaho in 1906. They had 2 daughters, Blanche, who was 15 when they moved to Twin Falls, and who was known for being one of the most beautiful girls in the neighborhood. Lyda, their younger daughter, was 13, and although she was deemed to be attractive, she was not nearly as much as her older sister was, in face or figure. In the east area of town lived the Dooley family, whose son Robert was an avid pursuer of Blanche's affections, and it was expected by many that they would be married. Robert was heartbroken when Blanche moved to Twin Falls and her letters abruptly stopped. She elected to marry someone else over him, and Lyda offered Robert her sympathies and companionship. Soon, Robert, or Bud as he was known to those personally in his life, would come to have feelings for Lyda. Along with his brother Ed, Robert decided to move to Twin Falls, Idaho, so they could seek out more prosperous opportunities. Once there, Robert fell for Lyda when he met her in person, and they married on March 17, 1912. Brothers Ed and Robert Dooley became partners in farming and raising stock together, and all 3 would share a home during these years. In 1913, Lyda would welcome a baby girl into the world, Lorena Marie. The lives of all 4 were blessed with prosperity and family until an unforeseen tragedy struck in 1915. By the end of July that year, Ed had fallen gravely ill, and after 10 days, on August 9, 1915, he was dead. When Robert returned after burying his brother back in Kayettsville, Missouri, he fell ill with the same type of symptoms, which he had just lost his brother to. On October 1, 1915, Robert Dooley would die in Boyd Hospital 10 days later, believed to have been stricken down by typhoid fever. Robert and Ed's brother Fett returned with Lyda to sort out their financial affairs, and over the 3 weeks he remained there, he noticed that something was amiss. Something felt suspicious to Fett, and he employed an attorney to look into the matters further. However, neither Fett nor the attorney unearthed any evidence. On November 15th of the same year in which she lost her father and uncle, 2-year-old little Lorraine Marie would suddenly fall ill in much the same way they had, and died. Lyda Trueblood Dooley would be paid out the $2,500 of life insurance money that Robert and Ed had set up together, in addition to the life insurance policy Robert had solely established for his wife. Both policies had made her and her daughter their exclusive beneficiaries. Lyda would relocate to Montana, and almost 2 years passed before the widow met a waiter named William G. McCaffell of Hardin, Montana. The pair were married shortly after in June 2017. McCaffell had set up a life insurance policy which made his wife the sole beneficiary of $5,000, which today would equate to roughly $85,000. Mr. McCaffell would die on October 22, 1918, from what was believed to be influenza and diphtheria. However, he had failed to regularly pay his life insurance, and so Lyda received nothing in return. Less than a year later, Lyda would meet Harlan C. Lewis, an automobile mechanic who was described as a big, strong, and brawny young man. They were married in Denver, Colorado on March 10th, 1919. Her third husband also took out a life insurance policy where his wife would be the beneficiary of $5,000. Only 4 months after getting married, Harlan abruptly passed away. At the time, his physician believed he had died from acute gastroenteritis, which is inflammation of the stomach and intestines, usually caused by a viral infection or bacterial toxins. Lyda was paid out the $5,000 once she could prove her husband had died from pedoamine poisoning, commonly known as food poisoning. Lyda Dooley McCaffell Lewis would next select Edward F. Meyer, a foreman at Blue Lakes Ranch, to be her betrothed, and the couple wed in Pocatello, Idaho on August 10, 1920. They returned the next day to Twin Falls, Idaho to build their new life. Now, as Edward was filling out an application for an insurance life policy, Lyda apparently motivated him to increase the amount from the original $2,000 to $10,000. This would equate to a payout of $150,000 for Lyda if husband number 4 happened to meet his demise. The same day, Edward also drafted a will making his wife the sole beneficiary of all of his property, which was approximately $15,000 or $224,000 in purchasing power today. Combined, this would have made Lyda one very comfortable widow. On September 7, 1920, Edward would die of what the doctors believed to be typhoid fever, making Edward the third loved one of hers who had passed away from this illness. An autopsy was performed the same day, and when part of his internal organs were transferred for chemical analysis, it came back that arsenic was present. Soon after, the bodies of her second husband, William G. McCaffell, along with that of her daughter, Lorena Murray, were exhumed. Part of their internal organs were also removed and sent to the lab for analysis. The results showed that they were also positive for arsenic. Lyda would mysteriously disappear during this time, never to resurface to inquire about the inherited estate, nor the amount due her from the life insurance policy. After the discovery of arsenic in 2 of her late husband's and her only child's organs, the police searched the premises of the home she had shared with Edward Meyer. Inside, they found an astonishing amount of brown flypaper. Flypaper is a device constructed of paper that is very sticky and coated with a sweet fragrance that is sometimes toxic. It is designed to trap flies and other flying insects when they land on it. At that time in history, the poison on the paper contained metallic arsenic, which is known to be highly toxic to humans. Also discovered in their home were bunches of wads of the pulp of the paper, which were obviously wet with the toxic substance having been manually squeezed out. In addition, the flypaper and pulp were located inside the furniture and other random obscure places around her house. Due to this discovery, the home once occupied by Lyda and her third late husband Harlan C. Lewis in Billings, Montana, would also be searched. Authorities found the same substance there. It would later be revealed that Lyda's signature method of murder was to boil arsenic out of the flypaper and then blend the poison into her cooking, in a nice cup of tea, or inside her specialty, her own apple pies. Only 2 months after the death of her fourth husband, Lyda married Paul Vincent Southard, a petty officer in the Marines stationed in Los Angeles, California. Together, they relocated to Honolulu, Hawaii, shortly after the wedding. A few weeks prior, Sheriff Deputy V.H. Ormsby and the coroner Dr. Maury, appointed by Idaho authorities, had visited the cemetery gravesites of Robert and Edward Dooley. The family had always been suspicious about the circumstances of their sons' deaths and how they had both suddenly died within Lyda's company. Their viscera was also collected and sent for analysis, which showed poison to be present in both of their bodies. A warrant for the arrest of Mrs. Lyda Dooley McCaffell Lewis Meyer was now underway. On May 11th, 1921, after a long hunt ensued, which covered a dozen states in addition to Mexico, the Black Widow had been ensnared. Lyda was arrested on suspicion of the murder of her husbands Edward F. Meyer, William G. McCaffell, Robert and Edward Dooley, and her young daughter, Lorraine Marie. By month's end, she was extradited back to Twin Falls, Idaho, to face her fate. It was later revealed that a woman named Mary James, who had helped Lyda get a job in Idaho City and who once lived with her during her time in Los Angeles, had suspected that she had stolen a diamond. Because of this suspicion of the stolen jewel, Mary James contacted authorities and informed them that Lyda had moved from Twin Falls to Los Angeles. This led Sheriff Deputy V.H. Ormsey to travel to Los Angeles in further pursuit of her. There, he learned that she had married Paul Vincent Southard, Chief Petty Officer of the USS Monterey, stationed at Pearl Harbor, Honolulu. Mr. Southard would later tell the police how his wife had tried to get him to set up a life insurance policy for $10,000. However, he communicated to her that he was aware that their marriage was not legal because he had only been divorced a month earlier, and under California law, a divorce must be finalized with a final decree of divorce a year after the initial decree. He also stated how he would happily marry Lyda again before she went to trial. Mr. Southard expressed concern for her health and attempted several times to move his wife into a hospital due to her declined appetite and being provided with little exercise at the jail. He also put in a request to go on leave so he could support Lyda during her trial, because he fully believed in her innocence. The chief petty officer did not grasp the serious reality of how close he had become to making Lyda Trueblood a widow for the 6th time. Lyda Trueblood was charged with the murder of her 4th husband, Edward F. Meyer, and would be placed on trial in October of 1921. Her own father was called by the prosecution to testify against his daughter. Apparently, before she took off for Los Angeles, she had conveyed to her father that she would leave this town and go so far away that no one will ever find me. Lyda's parents publicly announced to the press that they would not be helping their daughter with any costs of her defense. They both expressed how they hoped and did believe that their daughter was innocent, but that if she was guilty, their finances would not be the answer to save her, and that she should be punished for her actions. After Lyda had fled Twin Falls for Los Angeles, her parents only heard from her one time, which they noted was not in her usual character. Her father even was in the vicinity for several weeks, checking out the area to possibly relocate, but he had attempted unsuccessfully to locate his daughter. The prosecuting attorney, Frank L. Steffen, was investigating the circumstances around Lyda's multiple marriages and the life insurance policies connected with each of her prematurely dead husbands. He claimed that he had evidence, as analyzed by state chemists Herman Harms and Edward F. Rodenbach, that an identical fatal poison had been discovered to be present inside 4 out of 5 of her husbands, in addition to the brother of her first. Judge Babcock approved the admission of this evidence in the trial court to establish that there were no elements within the death of Edward Meyer that could point to his death being caused by an accident. At the trial, Sheriff Deputy V.H. Ormsey took the stand for the prosecution, discussing at length the exhumation of their bodies, the collection of specimens from their organs, and the transparent conversation held between him and the defendant. According to the sheriff's deputy, over the period of time that he spent with Lyda once she was in his custody and prior to her incarceration at the jail, she openly shared with him details about her husbands, their illnesses, and how each of them had life insurance policies in which she was the sole beneficiary. 6 weeks later, the jury found Lyda Trueblood Southard guilty of second-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 10 years to life in prison. On May 4th, 1931, nearing the end of those 10 years, Lyda, always known for her persuasive charm, would escape prison with a little manly assistance. She had convinced a prison guard to set up a ladder next to a rose trellis outside her cell window, from which she escaped. A car was waiting for her, with a former inmate inside, David Minton, who had fallen in love with Lyda prior to his own recent release from prison. However, Lyda had simply used him as a tool for her escape and left him shortly after. When the police located David Minton, this rejected ex-convict, he was more than happy to direct the authorities to Lyda's new home in Topeka, Kansas. She was caught 15 months later, working under the guise of a housekeeper for Harry Whitlock, a man who would become husband number 6. He somehow discovered who his wife really was and helped aid in her capture. In 1933, a journalist printed an expose on prison conditions, which revealed the extraordinary allowances and privileges which the prison warden at the time had dished out to Lyda. The expose named her specifically, and how she was given special favors, including allowing her to leave prison to see her ailing mother while unsupervised, for up to sometimes as long as 5 hours. Lyda was given rides in automobiles, taken to all-day excursions at a local resort, and was even permitted to go to the movies. Prison warden George Rudd would be replaced, but Lyda found a way to spread her charm all the way to her freedom. She was given parole in 1941 and granted a final pardon by 1942. She married one last time, a man named Hal Shaw, who sooner than later disappeared. Lyda would die of a heart attack in 1958 as a widow. It is very relevant to view this perpetrator, her crimes, and the way the criminal justice system treated this female offender through the lens of its time. In the early 1900s, America was in the midst of a massive transformation. The Industrial Revolution had drastically changed the way people functioned in everyday life. Mass immigration from Europe and other continents fundamentally evolved and diversified the culture, redirecting the social landscape. A great many people did not have running water or electricity in their residences, and the vast majority still either went by horse or foot to get from place to place around town. Women had minimal legal or social rights and were still very much perceived as the property of their fathers and then through marriage, that of their husbands. Very few women worked outside the home or were educated past a high school degree. Although the number of higher educated and independent women in society was slowly increasing, those who were often were treated like degenerates, female rebels, and perceived as rejects of society. On April 6, 1917, the U.S. Congress declared war on Germany, and the country officially entered World War I. This was a time when those who were not sent out to fight for the nation were stuck at home to incessantly worry about their loved ones, all while trying to adjust to the new industrial ways of life. The war would help to induce massive change in the roles women were previously allowed to partake in. Women were initially constrained to solely feminine positions, such as teachers and domestic work, but World War I expanded their opportunities in the workforce, at least during wartime. Their employment was greatly needed in manufacturing, textiles, sales, nursing, and clerical work. The women's suffrage movement, whose roots began in the 1840s, at last took real momentum during this time, and its long struggle for liberty would bring women the right to vote by 1920. The robotically controlled behavior of women and the frivolous, downright torturous fashions of the Victorian era would come to an end and make way for the independent and rebellious flapper style of the Roaring Twenties. This was the first wave of feminism in the United States. Lyda Trueblood was fully dependent upon men and solely driven to feed off the inherited wealth of others by murdering them. But in her own depraved ways, she was a feminist. Lyda took direction and narrative over her life and manipulated not just the men in her personal circle, but had the entire criminal justice system wrapped around her finger. The newspapers went bonkers for this story of the attractive female murderer. While researching this case in newspaper archives, I found 26 headline stories about Lyda Flypaper Trueblood, one whose writer was openly repulsed by her actions and held no punches, so to speak, in how they felt towards her. The journalist openly bashed Lyda in the newspaper, saying, and I quote, "There is no story in fiction, Bluebeard not accepted, that contains more human depravity, heartlessness, disregard not only for human suffering, but for human life, then the circumstances recounted pertaining to any woman, then that which now attaches to Lyda Trueblood, if true. A complete abandonment of humane instincts for money and moral, connubial, and social obligations, metamorphosed into greed, than which there is no history of great profligacy. Though she were the most repulsive object breathing pure air, but exhaling withering gas, who could not find it within his heart to wish that some evidence may be disclosed to temper the bitter feeling against her. Lyda has been coined the female Bluebeard, lethal Lyda, and by obvious associations a Black Widow. Between 1915 and 1920, her crimes allotted her what would be today over $730,000 in insurance money. Her calculated manipulations at winning men's hearts and encouraging them to open up life insurance policies in her name was, if nothing else, astonishing. She was not especially beautiful, but she obviously really knew how to play the hand she was dealt with, and by all accounts was extremely successful at luring men into her web. There are several typologies that have been constructed to help understand the motivations and psychopathology behind different kinds of female serial killers, including that of the prophet predator, which I think describes Lyda Trueblood perfectly. Prophet predators are motivated to murder for the generation of wealth and material gain they can garner from those they kill. This kind of serial killer often crosses over into other typologies, such as Black Widows and Angels of Death. They are distinct from the other typologies, since financial gain and comfort is the predominant purpose to commit murder. From what we can gather by her crimes, Lyda was not necessarily turned on by murder, nor is there any evidence that she even enjoyed killing those closest to her, but they were merely a means to an end. Her primary motivation was to gain as much money as possible from as many men as possible in the shortest length of time. The death of her only child in order to gain even more money shows how her only priority in life was financial gain, no matter what the cost to others. In order to achieve her goal, she had to put on an act, which she successfully did for several decades. I don't think her motivation was driven by revenge, jealousy, or anything emotionally complex, such as a betrayal in her past by a man that triggered something dark inside her. I think Lyda loved attention, and she loved attention the most, which she could prosper from. Although she never admitted to the crimes, she never expressed any remorse or sadness for all of the people in her life that she had lost. Imagine if Lyda had not been the culprit of all of these deaths. How could any person continue to keep trying over and over again at love and marriage with the great enduring losses in her life? That makes zero sense that no one suspected anything of her prior to Edward Meyer's death, which would be the one to finally spark suspicion. Except it does make sense, given how women who are criminals are perceived by the patriarchal society we're brought up in, and even more so considering the time she lived in. Our world, in particular the United States, has a historical resistance in believing that women can be just as dark, evil, cruel, and twisted as men can be. As defined by the chivalry hypothesis, there is a resistance to apply criminal characteristics to women because it goes against the vein of how society views females, in particular wives and mothers. This chivalrous treatment can exist in many forms within the various stages of the criminal justice system. Research has been shown that it especially benefits white women of middle to upper socioeconomic classes who have access to legal representation and who do not have a previous criminal record. At this time in history, a woman considered a criminal, much less a murderer, was almost laughable. And if they were, then they obviously must be insane or very ill. For a woman who knows how to utilize their feminine wiles, if you will, when they commit murder, they are treated as if they need to be taken care of by the institutions, which are predominantly composed of and dictated by masculine forces. This is evidenced by how Lyda was treated with chivalry and great leniency by the courts and the prison system from the time she was initially captured to her pardon. To receive a second-degree murder conviction for directly adding poison to her husband's food and drink, for him to purposely consume so that he would die, does not define second degree in a court of law. This implies that although she had the intent to kill, she did not premeditate or plan the murder, which the evidence of the presence of arsenic proved otherwise. Under Idaho's statutes for homicide, the first part of the statute states that first degree is defined by murder, which is facilitated by means of poison, lingering in wait, or through an act of torture, when such is done with the intention of creating suffering, an act of vengeance, as a mean of extortion, or to fulfill a sadistic desire, or any murder which is willful, deliberate, and premeditated. Isn't that ironic? How the very first part of the description acknowledges the cruelty of poison as a tool to perpetrate a death. Yet somehow for Lyda, this was not the case. Despite all of the very strong physical evidence and suspicious timing of her marriages, life insurance policies, and multiple husbands' deaths that the state prosecution presented to the jury, although all circumstantial, they could not find her guilty of first-degree murder. There have been countless individuals in our court system who have been convicted of first-degree murder and given life imprisonment or even the death penalty with far less evidence than what the state had to prove her guilt. Under Idaho's statute for homicide, a conviction of second-degree murder is a guaranteed sentence of no less than 10 years and can be as long as a life sentence. The initial sentence Lyda was given was therefore fair according to the sentencing parameters. However, once she escaped prison, she was only given another 10 years, to which she was later paroled and then granted a pardon for her crimes. Perhaps Lyda Dooley McCaffell Lewis Meyer Southard Whitlock Shaw was just a brilliant psychopath who knew how to manipulate the system and the men at its helm to her will. What are your thoughts on how Lyda Flypaper Trueblood was treated by the criminal justice system? Was it the chivalry of the courts? Or was she just an exceptional manipulator of the patriarchy, which existed all around her? Yet she outsmarted them all. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your being here with me, and I am beyond thrilled to be your host. Please feel free to let me know your thoughts and feelings on this perpetrator and this case. Also, as a reminder, if you enjoy this show, I humbly ask that you push the follow or subscribe button on your streaming platform of choice. It's simple, it's 100% free and easy to do, and it helps me immensely in being able to help others find my show. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for shades of murder unfolding in the streets, next door, and especially inside your own home. Lyda Dogma's Shades of Murder was created, written, researched, and edited by Lyda Dogma. Music composed by Ashot Danielian, courtesy of Pixabay.